All right, welcome everybody to this online panel discussion sponsored by the First Nations Film and Video Festival Incorporated. First Nations Film and Video Festival is dedicated to promoting Native American First Voice in media and providing them a venue for their voices. We are actually a very small company. Me and the co-director here, Samantha Garcia, do the day-to-day operations of the film festival, and in conjunction with a 3-person board. And with that, we've been able to not only put on 2 festivals a year, May 1st through the 10th and November 1st through the 10th every year. We started a new program of a summer outdoor screening, and then today's program, which is fine, we'll do it ourselves, online discussion panel series. The impetus of this panel series was very simple. I attended a few online panel discussions about the idea of diversity in film festival circles, most specifically, but the filmmaking industry as a whole. And almost to a panel, at least the ones I attended, they would talk about diversity, but 100% of those panels that I attended had no Indigenous or Native people on them when they were discussing diversity. So it made me feel like, fine, we'll do it ourselves, just to create this space where Native filmmakers and Native creators can actually talk about topics that sort of impact them, or how things work in the film industry from their perspectives, sort of like giving us Native filmmakers a voice in a space that sort of belongs to us. I think is vastly important. So that's just why these series has started. This is episode 1 of our 2nd series. We usually try to do one in the summer and in the fall, and then in the spring. And this is our first topic is what we must never do is steal from ourselves, and the idea of Native American self-appropriation. We talk about cultural appropriation a lot when it comes to Native representations. So what does that look like from a Native perspective? And I'm joined today by 5 Native filmmakers, and I guess we'll let them introduce themselves. We'll go in alphabetical order from last name. So Nadine, Trevor, Michelle, Terry, and Victoria, if you can introduce yourselves.
Toshi, Miigwech for inviting me to this panel. I'm very excited to meet you all. And my name is Nadine Arpin. I live in Sulikout, which is in northwestern Ontario, really close to Lake Superior and Thunder Bay, and between Winnipeg and Thunder Bay. And I have been living and working in Sulikout the majority of my life. My family moved here from Manitoba originally. So I am a Two-Spirit Red River Michif who is sort of has been displaced the majority of my life. So that does influence some of, I think, my work and how I look at things. But yeah, so I'm just excited to meet everyone and to begin this conversation. Is it just an introduction first?
Yeah, perfect. That was amazing. Hey, my name is Trevor Carroll. I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm from the Wikwemikong First Nation, which is in Northern Ontario. And I am a actor, director, producer, and currently I do all those things.
Hello, Michelle Hernandez. I am a Wiyot and Latina filmmaker. I currently produce and direct and run a company with my husband. Yeah.
Nyawiskano, everybody. My name is Terry Jones. I'm a member of the Seneca Nation of Indians, and we're located in Western New York State. But I always like to say 40 miles south of Niagara Falls, because we consider ourselves to be surrounded by the states, not in the United States. I'm a filmmaker. 2012, I went back to school, went to film school at Syracuse University, graduated. Pandemic. Right now, I'm at York University in Toronto, but right now I'm presently in the States on my territory. I'm going back tomorrow, studying film. A lot of my film works have found distribution at the Canadian Filmmakers Distribution Center in Toronto. And currently, I'm the curator and host of the Haudenosaunee Micro Short Film Program, where we've screened, this is our second year, we screened at the Birchfield Penny Art Center in Buffalo, New York, Buff State University. And the Seneca Niagara Casino came to our show the first time, and they said, we want to bring it there. So they were all about what we represent with the program is paying screening fees. So the casino said, whatever you're paying, everybody double it, whatever you're paying yourself, triple it. So it was really great to be able to be in a position to do that. So, and then I'm really excited about talking about this subject because it's something that I deal with overall, using music, sound, words, all that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What an honor to be among so many interesting and accomplished professionals here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Victoria Sutton. I'm Lumbee, the Lumbee tribe from North Carolina. And I am an academic, a law professor. And so a lot of my documentary film is related to Indigenous issues, law, and the environment. So I'm excited to be here to talk about these really interesting issues. And I really appreciate the vision that you had, Ernest, for the film festival, as well as these panels, because this is a good space to be in to talk about these issues in a way no one else is doing.
Well, thank you. So that brings us to, I guess, the topic of discussion, this idea of self-appropriation. I mean, for me, it's sort of like a sticking issue, because in my own filmmaking, I try not to actually incorporate anything Native for fear of that. But has that sort of like idea that you needed to incorporate sort of like tribal information into your film work, was that sort of like, do you feel it is necessary to do that? Or do you feel, well, let's just begin by defining how you felt, what you think it is first and foremost. And secondly, was there an instance that you felt that, you know, one way or the other about it, that you made up your mind about, well, I should be doing this more, or I should be doing this less? And I'll just throw that out to anybody, whoever wants to take that up first. Go ahead, Nadine.
Yeah, I actually think it's I'm really fascinated by this idea, because I mean, for me, it's more about trying to find a way of communicating that is actually non-Western, like trying to break down the whole idea of what does it mean to even approach stories in such a linear way. You know, I have been trying in my work, and it's part of my own struggle, because as a midship person, being acknowledged and included as part of the Indigenous people of North America is fairly new. It's only been since the mid-'80s. So like that's part of that, trying to understand what does that mean when you have kind of been brought up in a culture where it's been really pushed down. Like if you were white passing, it was really encouraged, you know, as midship families when they were trying to struggle. And so from the past 20 years, actually since the passing of my mother, because it was something that was so intense for her, like she was so protective of, you know, trying to protect what she thought was her family, because there was so much pressure against, you know, identifying as Indigenous, that I had to wait till she was gone to really dig into the family and can reconnect with family that she had severed ties with when I was young. So it's been a really interesting journey. So for me, it's trying to understand what does indigeneity or Indigenous ideology mean in a contemporary context for somebody who's just trying to understand it, and recognizing when you inherently are Indigenous, so that inherently, you know, your experience is not something that you can change. You know, we didn't fit in because fundamentally we were not a white family, you know, and no matter what you do, you know, there's only so far you can go. And so for me in my work, this idea of trying to, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. You want to say, I want to make like, action movies and I want to do it like, Marvel. I don't feel that there's any pressure necessarily to try to incorporate Indigenous ideas or identifiable characters that, are drawing from, cultural context. But what I think is important or could be important for me as an Indigenous artist is trying to understand what does it mean to bring a complete, like full circle, balanced and authentic voice to my work that also reflects my inherent Indigenous teachings and culture that has just been brought up, and it's because our parents have been exposed. You live with your grandmothers, like these things get passed on. So I think these sort of blood memories and this idea of carrying these things through our artwork, to me just seems an inherent part of what we're doing. So, if you feel you're questioning it, I often wonder why we even have to ask that question, I guess. Why, in some ways, I wonder, why do we feel we need to ask that question, I guess? And I'll leave that little question to the group.
Well, that brings up, oh, go ahead, Terry.
For me, I think my biggest fear when I started to do storytelling, not only, I don't really use sound, but when you think about as where we come from, our songs, our stories, our music is communal. They belong to everybody. No one copyrights it. So when I use archival images or like in Suit for My Brother, my short documentary, I have my great grandfather's voice giving the Thanksgiving address while my dad is talking about Indian medicine or sassafras, and he's making corn soup. And my biggest fear when I do that is somebody from the community saying, "Who do you think you are? Like you didn't ask us permission." But I think for me, as an Indigenous artist, sometimes we're kind of self-regulating. In the outside world dominant culture, as an artist, you're about pushing boundaries. And you can be celebrated for pushing things and things that are taboo. But for me, and as an Indigenous filmmaker, storyteller, though I don't have that luxury. So I have to be almost overly cautious on how I use them. What context are they in? Luckily for me, when I did that with Soup for My Brother, the family liked the story, my community liked the story. It played in festivals throughout the world. But an element of what I feel when I talk about my work is not only like entertaining the audience, and in some ways it's educating, but when you talk about educating for the outside world, for me, that's up to me. That's not me trying to, me in the mindset of what is it that I think they need to see to understand us better? Why can't we just be? Why? And if, like in Soup for My Brother, I had my grandfather's voice there, but it wasn't loud enough and it wasn't long enough where I could tell people wanted to hear. But I'm like, that's not what I wasn't there for. Was so that you could hear a nice, crystal clear Thanksgiving address, reciting it. And yeah, so that's sort of where I am when I put my stories together. My latest one, Savage Future, I use my family's images, but then I use iconic images about boarding schools. And yeah, it's a great conversation to have, because I think sometimes we're spiraling around in our own universes, but I think the process of what we do is kind of the same on how we approach and how we deal with hopefully not self-appropriating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I can build on or take from Nadine and Terry's start there, and a really interesting insight. Thinking about another issue along those same lines, looking at your own culture, but what if you are Native and you go to another Native culture, and you can't be arrogant. You have to listen. You have to be aware that you're an outsider. You may be Native, but you don't know the traditions of that particular tribe. And you have to be very careful not to impose your own worldviews from your own traditions and think they're the same. So in some ways, it's almost more challenging to be a Native filmmaker and go into a Native with another tribe. And I'm using the example of a documentary that was in a previous film festival here. That was the court-martial of the Apache Kid. And one of the things that I also want to add is I think this also ties in some themes from Terry and Nadine, and that is, who's your audience? And if you're thinking about other Native people watching, I think that helps keep you on track. If you're just thinking about how do I spark controversy or get interested or create a stereotype that someone might want to see, I think you might be that kind of makes you go in the wrong direction. If you think about my audience is Native, I think that helps a lot. And I have an example of that. As I was working with a casting director for the Apache Kid, we were looking at, for example, we were looking at some Lakota actors to play Apache Kid, and it just didn't feel right. And I knew all of my Native friends would look at it and say, he's Lakota, he's not Apache. And so I thought, well, I at least should have someone who speaks the language. They can, that will be more authentic. That will bring the feeling to the documentary that I'm trying to get. And this documentary was really docudrama. So it was reenactment of the trial and then cut out to experts talking about it. So I ended up casting someone from the Apache, San Carlos Apache. And an interesting twist here I'd like to share with you is to do this, I had to hang out a lot and just talk to people and drive around and see who looked like the part, who might be an actor. And I was introduced to someone who was willing to do it, not an actor, but we started talking, and then the conversation drifted into Apache, and I, of course, lost the chain of the conversation. But then they laughed and came back and said, we found out he's actually a descendant of the Apache Kid. So I think by listening to my my sense of my audience, it led me to cast the right person for that part, and it wasn't easy because he wasn't an actor, but he wanted to be. So it turned out that it worked out really well in the end. So that's kind of a couple of experiences that you made me think of there.
Cool. Yeah.
Hey, I have like kind of a unique perspective on this stuff because I'm First Nations, Native American, Indigenous, whatever the term is. I don't really like to go by the term Indigenous because I feel like it just kind of blankets over the larger global thing, but I feel like I'm Native American. Growing up, I was adopted when I was a child into like a Caucasian family. So growing up, I always knew what it was like to feel, to be an Indian, but I never knew what it was actually like to be an Indian because I never grew up in that environment. So growing up, I could always kind of like I was kind of like on the outside looking in on the culture because I could always see what people were experiencing, and I could get like I've experienced racism and stuff growing up, experiencing that kind of thing and understanding like I don't have a true understanding of like what it is to be an Indigenous person. And once I started exploring my culture and like the digging further in, I mean, there's a massive amount of responsibility that we have as storytellers or how we portray our culture moving forward, because when people see us telling our stories from our perspective, they need some definite authenticity to our work. So the film that I made, which was No Reservations, it screened at your festival in like 2017.
Yeah.
it took kind of like my story and my perspective. So we had um, the theme of like Standing Rock and just flipping the perspective. So instead of having like we had an Indigenous corporation building a pipeline underneath a rich white neighborhood. We tried to flip the perspectives in order for people to understand what it was like to be in that position. And it was well received. I just, I feel like authenticity with our work is like the number one thing that needs to be addressed with appropriation, because when we're telling stories from our perspective with a genuine desire to share our culture, our perspective, our way of thinking, our way of life, it is really well received by everybody else. But if it comes from like a misdirected place where we're just throwing it out there, for instance, then it doesn't get well received, and people often take note of that and they make fun of our culture, et cetera, because it's not coming from an authentic place. Yeah, I could ramble on a little bit more, but that's just like my 2 cents on the start of it, just to kind of throw some dust out there for you guys.
Mm-hmm. It's appreciated. Michelle, anything to add?
Yeah, I think when it comes to just sharing your culture or your identity, because like I said, I'm Wiyot, so I'm much different than other nations, is being careful of what I want to share. Because there's always that idea that someone who's non-native will see something I share and decide that they want to take it and do it. And that's what I get really fearful of. I don't know if anyone else gets scared of that. Yeah. So that's why when I think of the things that I want to share, they're things that my cousin tribes, so the Yuroks and the Karuks and Hoopa, share, and that we share those things. So yeah, when I'm thinking about sharing something about our dances, I don't show the dance. I feel like I don't need to show that, but I can share about our regalia. And I feel like other people have that understanding of the importance of the regalia. And so I share those things to also educate non-natives. But yeah, I'm always very careful. Also, I, as a Wiyot person, don't feel like I can tell other Native people's stories. So I'm really careful and hesitant when it comes to that. And also, I want to share stories that don't just focus on my identity. I think that's a huge thing when I go and apply for programs. They're always like, oh, we want more of that. We want more Native things. And I'm like, why? Why can't we just be modern people? I think a lot of people think we're still in the past. I had my first experience at, I believe I was either 10 or 12 when I shared that I was Native. And someone said, oh, well, do you live in a teepee? And I was like baffled by that, because I was like, no, I live in a modern house. And also, my tribe didn't live in teepees. If we had teepees, they would mildew. We live in like a very rainforesty area. So we had redwood plank houses. And so it baffled their mind that we lived in modern houses, because the way they saw us, and especially in education, is that we are in the past and we're not present. And so that's kind of my job. What I want to do is make more modern day stories for us to tell. I did like for this film festival a couple years ago, I had Duke, which was kind of my only historical piece that I ever want to do, because I thought it was very important to talk about the boarding school experience and to tell the boarding school experience from my family's perspective and from where I'm from. And so, again, I had a purpose to do that. And I think as filmmakers, we need to have a purpose of when we tell stories and when we want to share who we are.
If I can mention that, if any of you can go see Duke, please go see it. It's one of those films that made an impact on me as well. There was this commonality that seems to be happening, that this concept of this priority to educate. Now, is that another cultural thing, that because we know that in most tribal histories, or at least tribal cultures, if you're not learning, you're teaching, right? So is this concept of having to educate a non-native audience always a priority in your filmmaking, or is it just something that you feel that you need to do, just to sort of, because we all know that schools have failed in the teaching of Native histories across the board, across the country. They've just absolutely utterly failed at that. But it somehow sort of like yokes the harness on us to sort of like to be the ones that have to do that. So there's that commonality that sort of like these pieces have to be educational? Do they have to be, or is this just a conscious choice that you feel you're making?
I can go first on that. I feel like no matter what we're making, people are gonna learn from it in a weird way. I also don't think it's our job to educate, and if they want education, I think they should pay us. That's something I've been telling a lot of younger up-and-coming filmmakers. I'm like, ask for money. That is not your job to do that. But I think it's our job to kind of start that conversation. I felt like with Duke, I told the story of boarding school. I did not focus on the trauma. That wasn't my job to do. I didn't want to do that. Every time I see a film about us, and especially from a non-native filmmaker, it's always trauma. That's all they want to see is trauma. And I'm like, I'm really tired of that. I'm living that. We're all living that. We're healing our elders. We're healing that part of our family. So we don't want to see that on the screen. Again, I feel like I'm going on a tangent. Sorry. But yeah, I think it's our job to start a conversation, and then it's the audience's job. I mean, whether it be non-native or native, to seek more on that, to find the books and books that are from like native people, not books from non-natives. So that's kind of what I request when people do that. And to go on the internet, when you look at in your research, make sure it's valid research, because there's all sorts of stuff out there. So doing your part as an audience, making sure all the sources are valid. But yeah, I think in a weird way, we're slightly educating, or we're starting the conversation, but I don't think it's our job to be educators.
Well, the thing that always struck me is how much that, and I do this in the presentation I do, so I always make the comment that we do actually learn our histories through movies. And the most recent example I can think of is the film Hidden Figures, right? That nobody knew about those women until that movie came out, despite the book and the women still being alive. You know, the book was out for like 20 years before that movie came out. And the whole country woke up to the fact that, you know, these women existed when the movie came out. So the film does have this really larger impact that, you know, we that we have, you know. Then I can see where that issue comes in, like, you know, these things have to be sort of educational in a sense, to sort of like make some sort of impact on the audiences that we're thinking about.
Yeah.
Another commonality I see is this idea of that.
Awareness. Could I
Yes, go
comment
ahead.
on that? As being in academia, I guess I'm guilty of trying to educate. But one of the, I have a good example, I think, where I found the writer didn't bother trying to educate the audience, but the native audience got it. I thought it was kind of clever, so I want to share that with you. It was in one of the episodes of Reservation Dogs. And one of the, and for the audience who hasn't seen it, I'm going to describe it generally. There were two native girls having lunch with a non-native white property owner who had invited them into lunch when she found them wandering around. And the two girls glanced at some linen she had with an owl on it. So everybody who's native got it because they looked at the owl, then they looked at each other, considered a bad omen. But a non-native would not have seen that. So the writer didn't bother to try to explain that. You just had to subtly pick up that the two girls had picked it up, and probably most people who weren't native probably didn't get it. And that's one of the good things I think that Reservation Dogs does. And I will say one of the other things that I'm disappointed they don't do more education on is the way they depict the reservation as being drugs, alcohol, and suicide. And yeah, there's a lot of truth to that, but we have a lot of good things going on too. There's food sovereignty movements. There's lots of reclaiming your culture. And I would like to see a little bit of that, but who wants to see that when they can see drama? And so, you know, that's when I guess you don't educate, but I would like to see more of that from them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Reservation Dogs. I've never seen it personally. But there's this another thing, this aspect of, you know, sharing of cultural information, the idea of using it to create a more authentic voice versus, you know, this area of pushing it towards exploitation or perceived exploitation. Has anybody had any experience in sort of that idea of you were required to do that, or and how did you push back, or if you or do you feel that you've needed to put that into your work? What?
I mean,
Oh, you
Trevor,
go.
You want to go? Okay.
No, you go.
Okay. I have not. I've had people pitch it to me. I've had white people pitch me trauma stories. I had one person who pitched our massacre. So in 1860, my tribe had a huge massacre, and someone wanted to exploit that. And so at this time, I didn't know how to say no, because I hadn't ever had that happen to me.
Yeah.
And I remember being taken aback and listening and taking his call and his pitch to me. And afterwards, he was all done. He's like, how do you feel about this? And I was like, you know what? This is my time to finally say something. And I said, you're exploiting my tribe. Like, you're exploiting my trauma. And the way he wanted to go about it, he wanted to kind of recreate it. And I told him, I was like, no, we're not doing that. You shouldn't do that. Also, it doesn't have to do with the story you're telling. And, I'd never had someone kind of real quiet and didn't know how to respond to me, because he was taken aback too. And then he realized, he's like, oh, you're right. I am doing that. And so I go, you really need to change those things. That might give me a while to think about it if I want to be a part of this project. And we ended it like that. And then within a couple hours, I got an email from him apologizing for that, saying, I'm so sorry to do that. I didn't realize that's what I was doing. And I told him, I accept your apology. And also, when you pitch things, you should think about those things. And those are kind of the things you should ask yourself if you're non-native. Also, maybe if you're non-native, don't be telling our stories. We're the ones who should be telling our stories. We know these stories. And so if you want to do something like that, bring on a native filmmaker, bring on a director, because we don't get those opportunities all the time.
Yeah.
And that's how you could be a great ally to us is, hey, I have this project. How would you tell it? How would you do it?
Trevor?
I lost my train of thought, but I was just thinking, like, when I first tried to learn about like my culture and like some other cultures, like I would go to like, I live on the West Coast now. When I was first trying to learn about it, it was kind of challenging, and I ended up moving away. Just how open Indigenous people are to like sharing the process, the protocol. There's certain things that that they're not really willing to share to like other cultures, because for centuries we've been exposed to like this thing where we can't share, or we can't practice our identity, and we can't share it, because if we do share it, people end up like mocking us for certain things, or like they'll wear headdresses to certain things, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always been this hesitancy for people to share, and that I think that's one of the main reasons why the process of like somebody asking for more, they're digging for more because they want to actually see more about our culture and more about like our identity. But there's never been this ability for us to openly be able to share it, because we experience some kind of like pushback in the form of like racism, or things that are like negatively turning around these things into like stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm kind of really interested with this idea of Michelle, when you were saying, nobody wants to see this, or nobody there's certain things that people want. They want the drama, they want the, the action. But I think that is part of that mindset where we feel we have to follow a certain structure when we're telling stories. And that's where that's kind of like how I'm trying to push back. And I'm not in the accomplished level that it sounds like you guys are. I haven't had a full feature, so I'm still working in the shorter film format, which is a little easier to kind of play with like structure and how you tell stories. And so I guess I'm questioning even that need to try to hit all the points when you're trying to pitch something. And it's like it almost like that idea of what the audience wants has been very dictated by this intense algorithm, and I feel that we all kind of sometimes get caught up in the swirl of what people are limited to see. You know, unless you're an active lover of the arts and you go and you see independent work and you actively seek it out, the majority of what people see is this generic action-based formula, basically. And I guess what I'm trying to do, and I think it is part of that idea of a balanced approach to making your film, should try to think about it in a different way than like a more colonial approach to filmmaking, I guess, and for a simpler way to describe it. So I guess asking the larger format filmmakers, do you feel that a lot of the pressure of you incorporating these images or trying to represent your culture or feel a responsibility to carry that in your work, is it because of the large budget, because of your funders? Like, what is creating that pressure?
That's a great question. Anybody can jump in. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Trevor or Cherry.
Terry. Yeah, I mean, it plays along with the same things, like in terms of like how I storytell. I do short films, independent films I made in undergrad. You know, it was up to us to find the locations, find the actors. Like, they gave us the equipment, but so then when my films were playing in festivals, like at Imaginative, they were like, you'd see these films with credits like 50 lines long, and then there's me. It's a film by Terry Jones, and it's just me and my dad in the background, or in the back of his brother's place. But storytelling is storytelling, not regardless, but sometimes if you don't have access to the technology, you can still tell a great story with what you have. And I like to think that I present complex issues. It can be residential schools. It can be intergenerational historical trauma. It could be about mixed marriages, but that's not the forefront of what it is. I mean, there's an element of storytelling, yes, of having the story being universal with universal characters who just, for me, I look at it like who just happen to be Indigenous or Native. But a lot of my films tend to be unresolved in the end. So when I do like a film screening and a community film screening, it opens up the dialogue to talk about these issues, in an open forum. But if someone streams it online, it might, like my newest film, Savage Future, a cohort of mine at York watched it, and he knew nothing about residential schools, and he's like, "Thank you for sharing that." He goes, "I got it," and I started to, try to understand the experience. So it's those sort of things that I try to incorporate. In terms of educating, I look at it more like, how can I tell my story? But it's almost like a side thing. I mean, it's giving context, I guess, in the way it is. But sometimes it can be teachable moments. And for me, as I mentioned earlier, it's about being authentic. It's authenticity. So I feel like if I'm authentic to the character or to the story, I tend to try to, like in undergrad, I made my first project, and the professor's like, "I don't feel you in this. You're just giving me images and you're just telling me things. I need to feel you in it. What are you in it?" So, a lot of the short films that I've made are either inspired by, and I feel lucky that I've been able to do narrative documentary about. It seems like my forte is experimental, of bringing up these complex issues or ideas, but in a way that makes make the viewer think. And one more thing is, we're talking about stereotypes. So I also know as a filmmaker going in, I'm either going to defy a stereotype or I'm going to reinforce a stereotype. But I feel like if I do my best to stay authentic, then if an image of corn comes into my screen, I know people might, or a feather or something might already be in the viewer's mind already. But if it's done in an authentic way, then it's not reinforcing the stereotype. Hopefully it's used in a context that's different than what they're doing. And then defying the stereotype is just the same wants and needs that everybody else want. You really want anybody who watches your films to feel like we all, the condition is we all have the common thread. We want to take care of our environment. We want to take care of our elders. We want to take care of who's here now. We want to plan for the future. I mean, that's pretty universal. So when I put these things together, it's a tricky balance. I'm very grateful for the things that have been able to go out and kind of find that balance between being very entertaining, but then not having my community say, well, we already know that, or it's pandering to like non-natives so that I'm educating them. But I hope that made sense in everything that I said.
Nice. Anybody else have anything to add to this idea of is there a pressure to include this sort of tribal information, cultural information, or do you feel a pressure to?
I can answer. As I said, if I'm a storyteller and I can't tell other people's stories, so my experience growing up in a traditional household and where I come from is my worldview, or sort of like what's in my wheelhouse to tell stories. And it kind of goes back to that thing where I'm not like misappropriating this knowledge. It's putting it in a way that's respectful. I can nod to it, but I'm not like I'm not like overdoing it. So I don't. For me, it's just that I can't help but put them in. It's sort of like building a Christmas tree. You don't just throw ornaments up in the air and hope they stick somewhere. It's like you got to have a nice foundation of a story and characters who just happen to be, and then you can add those elements. If it's an Indigenous character in an Indigenous setting, that you can add those elements to create drama, to create comedy. That's how it works for me.
Working in front of the camera, there's always I work on shows. There's a lot more acceptance into like our cultural identity in these new shows, like Reservation Dogs and this other show that I work on, Resident Alien. Really great show. They really incorporate a lot of Indigenous or First Nations cultural identity into the show. They do a really good job of making sure that they have a cultural advisor on set to be able to say like the process of like how this thing is written and how it is actually done is done in the correct way. These things, they need to be addressed, not just in the writing process, but I think also like on set when these things are actually reenacted, that it occurs in the right way. It's done for the right intention. It's done with the right process and protocol in place, and also it's done correctly, because when people watch it, I think you just mentioned like Apache and like Lakota, people can tell the difference, right? They can definitely see the difference between like somebody portraying it and like not what the real thing is. That's the key, is we want to play things for reality and not for like the fantasy. That's how things got started in the wrong foot, if you kind of get my drift. Like if we have the idealized or like the fantasy version of like what a Native American is, people automatically picture the buckskin native like riding a horse and like just long hair blowing in the wind. Like that image just sticks in people's head because they haven't been exposed to like what the actual Native American experience is, which is that we're real people with real identities. We go through the same thing that everybody else does. We just have experienced it in a different way, and we need to be able to tell the truth as to like what it actually is.
I think what you mentioned really reminded me of an incident on the show Northern Exposure, if everybody remembers that, where everybody knows where it sets in Alaska and the Inuit tribes up there. But Elaine Miles, the secretary, the smartest character on the show, did not, there's supposed to be like a dance scene, but she didn't dress in the traditional regalia of, the Inuit people. She dressed in her own regalia of her own tribe. And none of the TV audiences caught that, but a lot of the tribal audiences did. And they weren't upset with her, but they did question why she did it. And she realized that She said that she'd rather represent herself, her own tribe on television in those types of, cultural scenes, rather than trying to, replicate another tribal. Is sort of that idea of going back to what Victoria and you were talking about, of, not stepping over the boundaries of representing other tribal nations. I had a question. Now it just popped out of my head because of that.
Can I add on to that? Just one thing is, the cultural acceptance of Indigenous people over the last 20 years, it's grown a lot. Like I've seen like an explosion in terms of like Native American filmmakers, Native American shows, movies, documentaries, that kind of stuff. The growth and the ability to have Native American talent that represents all of these individual cultures, like having a Lakota actor play, Apache. Those issues come up a lot because we haven't really nurtured the film community enough to be able to have a wealth of 20 Lakota actors or 20 Apache actors. I find myself quite often portraying many different backgrounds. Like I've played a Mohawk, Iroquois, a Lakota as well. It's very difficult and challenging to try and go onto set because sometimes when we go out there, we don't really get the full scope of like what everything is, and just relies on us to do our own cultural research in order to find out the truth as to like what the process and protocol is for each individual culture. And it becomes like it becomes a lot for us to absorb and to be able to portray these characters and stuff on screen. So, I kind of lost my train of thought, but you kind of get what I mean. Like, we need to be able to nurture a wealth of all of these individual cultures in order for us to be able to build ourselves up even further.
Yeah. Is there, turning this to sort of like the twisting the dial in the opposite direction, are there sort of like taboos and places you shouldn't go or won't go? I know for Michelle, it was a lot about, not reliving the trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to chime on that. I think some things that I won't go on is, like I said, the massacre. I think my tribe does a good job at telling the history. I think there's books that do a great job. I won't go there because I don't feel like I want to relive those traumas. I feel like if you want to learn about it, then find sources for that, or ask me and I'll lead you to sources. Other things is I won't share my cultural practices and like our dances. That's something I don't think it's taboo. I just don't want to share that because I feel like there are non-natives, like I mentioned earlier, who will take those things we're seeing it now and then do it their own way in their own ceremonies. And you're just like, why are you doing that? That's very disrespectful to us. So those are things that I won't share, but I'll share, like I said, in my film Duke, I shared kind of our dances and what we believe are like our dresses. We believe that our dresses are living. And so there's a couple little lines that I put in the film where the two sisters are talking and they kind of talk about that. And that was my way of sharing my culture. And it was really great to see, like I said, my cousin tries watching it and be like, oh, you shared that part, because they believe in the same thing. So those were nice little things to share, these little beliefs we have. But yeah, circling back is I won't share about my tribe's trauma, whether it be our massacre, and I won't share our ceremonies just because those are very sacred to us. And again, I don't want non-natives taking it and doing whatever they want with it.
Yeah, for me, there's this, for a long time, there's this idea that I sort of like labeled in my own mind about the authorship of expertise, where non-natives sort of like build up their own knowledge base about tribal information. And then they become sort of the experts on tribal things. And then, academia and society at large would rather go to them rather than to tribal people. what can we do to sort of like, I like Trevor's idea of sort of like nurturing this base. So how do we sort of get to that point, or are we at that point right now, to sort of like build these sort of bases where, you know, tribal people can be be themselves on screen?
Well, I'd like to say that I did hire for my docudrama, someone who wasn't an actor. And I don't think Reservation Dogs would have done that and given a chance to someone who didn't have a resume. So I think we just have to really take chances and open the door to give people a chance that may not have had an acting program on their reservation, for example. And that was the case at San Carlos. So I think you just have to be open, and it's going to require more of your work. It's going to require more of the director's work, but I think we have to take a chance and do it. And I think we'll benefit by it.
I'm gonna kind of piggyback on Victoria, because that's kind of what happened in my situation. Because Duke is like kind of my starting point. What launched my career was I really wanted a WIA actress, and I did casting calls. Unfortunately, I didn't find one because you give them the script, they read it. But I actually casted my sister and my cousin, which was something I wasn't open to at the beginning, because I was like, oh, it's my little sister and it's my cousin. I see them all the time. But I'm happy I did, because they were brilliant. I think they're very talented, and it kind of launched my little sister wanting to act. And I think allowing those opportunities. Also, I feel like sometimes there's these little groups or this Rolodex that, you know, Hollywood has or the industry has, and they go to, and like Victoria said, don't really open those opportunities for people who don't have that resume that they need. And I think you get the best performance from non-actors because they live these things, they experience these things. So yeah, I think opening it up more and being more accepting and saying, hey, we're going to give you this opportunity, and they probably will excel at it. And I think that's what's really beautiful about it.
Having Indigenous characters on screen, it's great. I love seeing it now. We're seeing like great shows like Reservations Dog, Dark Winds, another thing that's like a big hit. It's on the AMC. If you guys haven't seen it, it's really good. Having rich, powerful Native American characters that aren't the bad guys or aren't the scapegoat of like the story. This is really important for not just for us, but for like our youth and the people that are watching these productions, because they need to see people like you and me and like everybody else that's in this discussion. They need to see us portrayed as like real people and not bad guys, or not people that have whatever substance abuse problems. I mean, it's true that, you know, Native American cultures, we have to deal with that. So does every other culture. We shouldn't be like just pinpointing that one individual thing for us to look at. For instance, just for the Black community, having I know when the superhero movie Black Panther came out, man, just to see like the feedback and the cultural pride that came from having the first Black superhero on screen. And that was a really important character also to like the story of like the overall story of like the Marvel universe. Man, that is so important for that community, but not just for them, but for us as well. I'd love to see a Native American superhero. Like, I don't know if they have one developed in like Marvel yet, but I think, you know, having something like that, something for us to attain, and something for like our youth to be able to look up to is really important for us. It's important for us to have role models and to see really strong, powerful actors on screen and be able to idolize them. And also for like the youth in the community, be able to like, to reach out to them. So, you know, you can reach out to like any actor through their social media. A lot of them are like really accessible. Like if you just Google whoever the leads are in Reservation Dogs, if you sent them a message, I'm sure that they would respond, because they really like, they want to get that connection with the youth and the community.
What you're mentioning of Black Panther really sort of like brought me back to the core concept of why I wanted to have this discussion. Was In this, you know, Black Panther was a huge hit. It was like a huge thing for African American communities. There is a Marvel superhero, Echo, that has her own series coming out pretty soon, and she made her debut in Hawkeye, I believe, is a Native person. But on the same sense, nobody asks Tony Stark his cultural heritage, right? And yet he's a huge hero. Nobody asks Captain America his cultural heritage, right? There's no cultural cost that they have to pay to be heroes. So why is it that we had to explore, you know, the deepest Africa to make Black Panther this huge hero? And then if Echo does come out, you know, when Echo comes out, how much of a cultural cost does she have to pay to sort of like just be accepted as, you know, a hero? So that's sort of like what was one of the epicness of this discussion that I wanted to have, is like, why is there that cost in the first place? And why is, you know, again, nobody's asking Tony Stark what his cultural background is, yet he gets to be a hero. He gets to be a really awful person too, at the same time. Does anybody have any reaction or thoughts on that?
I don't think white people, when we see them, we don't say, what's your background? I think that's just the culturally accepted norm. That's we just know that they're white, and we just assume that they come from like you know, Europe somewhere. That's just the norm. But, you know, for anybody of color, person of color, Indigenous person, even like Asian people, we want to delve into it even further, because we can just see that they have, how do I put this in a way? Like every culture has their own unique practices and ceremonies and like you know, protocols. We want to find out more about what it is, because that's just our innate nature to find out more about these things. But I don't think we get the same thing with like white people in general, just because we just assume that they're Europeans and South. I think one of the reasons why I just answered my question is that what is it? Assimilation or appropriation? We just assume that white people would just appropriate the cultural identity of the people around them.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
If you're done, I actually want to speak to, like, I think it's like there's the issue between urban and rural, and I often feel that there's this idea that, you know, people being portrayed, but I don't see people that I like. There's no one from all of Northwestern Ontario that I see on TV. There's the culture's not reflected, you know, and like Northwestern Ontario's, I don't know, twice the size of France. You know what I mean? Like, it's, you know, this is like a huge part of the country. And like what I find when you're talking about how do you get that talent, unfortunately, it's still very urban based. So unless the youth can, you know, process what it means to transition out of a small First Nation Northern community to a center like Vancouver or Toronto, or, you know, anywhere that might offer the type of exposure, it's kind of, it's like night and day. It's almost impossible. And there's no sort of transition. There's no kind of stepping stone. You're either like, boom, you know, you're in the city all of a sudden, you know, and the pressures of urban lifestyle, the lack of having, you know, your cultural connection to your family, to your community, it kind of, it's disrupts people. And that is fundamentally, you know, when we look at the larger picture of the all that's involved. And I think that's what, like, what I'm trying to talk about, even when making films, like, it's all of it. It's not just the story. It's not just what the story is about. It's how the story is made, how you contact your community, you know, how do people get involved? So my work is very much about fostering that kind of youth and mentoring people here to try to pursue those sorts of stories so that they're actually reflecting stories that they really want to see. Like, there's no stories about us, I think, in a real way. There's a lot of generic stories where there's like these little glimpses, like you're saying, a little owl in the corner, or like little things like that, like little nods to things, and they're kind of implied, but it's very generic. It's not really anything, you know? And that's the part that I find really challenging, is how do we not feel like we have to make excuses and create work that pleases the wide audience because people's tastes can change, and they can't change unless they see something different. And I guess that's where I'm trying to come from.
Go ahead, Tara.
For me, it's like I think we all agree representation matters. I'm curating the Haudenosaunee micro short film program. It's not necessarily to be exclusively for Haudenosaunee, but we can acknowledge and celebrate the storytelling and the filmmaking. Our stories were told by us at first, and then slowly we've been able to. Indigenous people, Native people have been more in positions of writing and directing and being in writers' rooms and all of that. But where I come from in my community, we don't have people on TV who look like us. The stories aren't like us. There's universal things about it, but there's something not particular especially when you talk about the youth and you talk about the what their point of reference is in terms of role models. So it's not like after we do the program, we have a Q&A, a filmmaker Q&A discussion about just something that's particular to us. And it's not that we're sour. It's more like, this is a great challenge. This is a great time to be Haudenosaunee because we are emerging. Our stories, as I said, representation matters. The actors, the people represented on screen could look like us, which in the bigger picture will help the dominant culture or those not Native will realize that we all look different. We all have different upbringings. We all have different settings and environments. Some have mountains, some have lakes, and that's the overall thing. But also when I think about, and this is just for me, and I'm not saying I'm right or it's wrong. It's not. There's room enough for everybody. But in terms of like this idea of success and that it only has to come through Hollywood in order to feel like you've made it. A lot of my projects are small. I'm glad they're small. But I'm tackling issues that hopefully will help healing when we talk about generational historical trauma, language preservation. My thesis film is going to be shot all in Seneca. It's not a big film, but it's just those little things matter. And in terms of grassroots success, for me, far outweighs like having the tipping of the hat of the industry to say like you've made it, sort of thing. It's there. It's and as I said, this stage is big enough for everybody. And I just like to feel like give the little man a voice in this. That success it's all about what's valued and where that value scale is. So thanks.
I secretly think we all have our Oscar speech planned, though. I think somebody else had something to add.
It made me think of this, and I'm not sure how relevant it is, but if you'll indulge me, I'll throw it out there and see. I was one of the things that I think is a risk in overly being concerned about appropriation is it makes investors afraid to invest in Native work and Native films. And I was an advisor for a play in Hollywood 2 years ago, and it was a Native American cultural advisor because they were adopting a 1970 production into a current day play. So there were Native characters, so they wanted to make sure that it reflected modern day sensitivities to culture. So that's kind of why I'm throwing it out there, that I think there was a real fear about even leaving the characters in because of the great concern about appropriating culture, maybe, or doing it the wrong way. So I think we have to be sensitive to that too. And I'm not sure exactly how to do it, but it's kind of a pendulum thing, I think, and we have to just be sensitive to make sure that that we don't discourage more use of Native culture, Native characters, by making people fearful that they're going to appropriate wrongly. I don't know what to do about that exactly, but maybe get a Native American cultural advisor.
Good, Michelle.
I kind of want to tag on Victoria. I don't have all the answers, but I think one great answer is maybe getting a Native writer or bringing on some Native person onto the project. I think I see a lot of that happening more, which is great, but I think we need more of it. and maybe creating more programs for youth. I think one thing I liked about Duke was we sent out, I talk about my movie a lot, I'm sorry guys, was that I went out into the Native community and I made this form and I said, hey, just fill out the form if you're a Native youth, you're interested. I was really sad because we only got one youth, but she was the greatest little helper we'd ever had. She worked so hard and it made her want to do films. And I think allowing those opportunities for youth, or just if you're doing a play or if you're doing a film, make sure you have Native people on there. Make sure they have a significant job. I think that's one of the solutions, and I want to see more of it. There's so many talented people. Again, I mean, we're all talented here, and there's more talented people outside of this that could be just as great as a job as someone who in Hollywood.
So, so sort of like to try conclusions here. And there's no right or wrong answer, I guess, to this. Is there a form of self-appropriation that happens in these Native films, or in the Native industry, at least? You can speculate on that if you want. It doesn't have to be a definite answer, but it's just something that I've been struggling with myself, because all of my film work, as I said earlier, I try never to include Arapaho things. But just that my characters just happen to be Arapaho. So how does everyone feel about this concept that we've sort of brought up, the idea of can you appropriate from your own culture, and is that a good thing or is it a bad thing?
Well, I'll start out as an academic. Everybody in academia knows that the most difficult research project you ever do is with your own tribe. And so for that reason, I think lots of people avoid it, just like you probably avoid it too, because it's really hard, and you'll get lots of critique. But yeah, so I think that's why we avoid it, and that's kind of a known thing. And it's also easy to be biased, of course, when you're doing your own culture. But at the same time, I think you have to say, who better to tell the story? Am I the one that actually has been asked to tell the story? I mean, is this pathway really taking me to tell stories about my own tribe and my own culture? So that's kind of my thought about that. Don't discount it, because maybe that's your path.
I mean, I like that thing you just said, like who better to tell the story, right? Even though there's like these taboos and things that we want to share, in the end, isn't that what it's, the idea is about, is who better to tell the story? Anybody else have anything to add?
I do actually, because I think that's a very controversial statement that you made, because I think that authenticity being like probably the buzzword, that it's important that we tell the story that we understand. And I know that there's a lot of topics of, well, does that mean I can't tell any other story? Like, does that mean I can only tell my little box, like whatever my life is? And I think that is our challenge, that's a challenge for all creatives, of how do we understand the work that we're presenting? And in film, which is a particularly powerful medium in my mind, because it's so far reaching, the potential it has is more, there's something really identifiable for a vast audience who get exposure to it. That I think that there's a responsibility to try not to anticipate what a character might be. Like you're saying, if it's not coming from you, you do need to have somebody that can have that authentic voice. And I think, like what Michelle was saying, is that you have to make sure that your crew, where you're coming from, it's not even enough to have a community say, I really like you, just come in and make it, even though you're not from this community, but we like you. Like I would question that. I don't think it's enough sometimes to just have one or two people's approval, in something that's really elaborate. That's where the community consultation is important, when you start talking about things that are much more closer to whether it be the historical context of a community, or of a First Nations, or of an event. So I guess for me, I'm very I am very much stay away from anything that is not appropriate for me. For example, as an Indigenous artist or as an motif artist who falls in that Indigenous category, I am often asked to partner in projects because, well, you're Indigenous, it's going to look good on the thing, right? Even though I have nothing to do with the community that a project might be about, you know. And that's that sort of that art funding, the craziness about art funding, and you know, hitting all the marks and stuff like that.
We need
But
to
those
do
are
a
the kind
panel
of
on art
things-
funding.
Yeah. Right. We didn't go to the art funding. Yeah. So I mean, as an independent artist, like that is my, like, I'm not worried about Hollywood. I'm not care. You know, I'm about festivals and community screenings and being like really involved and being present. And that was something that Trevor said too, like being visible in my community. Like, you know, I make films, but you can come and talk to me and we're going to make more films, you know, like I don't just blow into a community, do my thing and then take off. And that's one thing that I have a hard time with in First Nations communities here in Northwestern Ontario. There's a lot of will to bring something in, do a lot of hoopla, and then be gone. And then, you know, and then kids are like, what happened? You know, like that was really great for like a day, you know, but there's no continuity. And that's something that we're really trying to encourage, like their ongoing contact, you know, an actual relationship. When you're working with a young artist, that there's some continued check-in, like, you know, you kind of like, there's a bit of a commitment, I think, as a mentor and as an active artist to give back to your community. Like, to me, that's important, and help to nurture those young voices and knowledge keepers to help share, like, all, you know, to express what does that contemporary Indigenous life look like, you know, whether it be First Nations, Indigenous, you know, or Inuits or Motifs, you know, like, so those are the kinds of things that I think are part of that holistic approach to the craft. And I guess that's sort of part of my struggle.
Trevor.
Just when she mentioned a knowledge keeper, I happened to like run into like my first knowledge keeper like this year, and one like key lesson that I learned from him is that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. There's a lot of well, just overall First Nations people all across North America, there isn't a lot of written history because it's all oral, and oral tradition is the way things are passed on to these people. Once something is like written down, it's open for interpretation to you or to anybody else moving forward. And once it's written down in history forever. And people are open to interpret that however they want for the rest of the time. If you look at something like the Bible, which has been like translated numerous times, it might not even have this exact same the exact same lesson because it's been interpreted so many times. For us, when we move forward, how we say things is of the utmost importance, and how we deliver the messages of the utmost importance. And
I think that's a fantastic point you just made about, you know, how we say things and how it's orally passed on and how it's open to interpretation. I think it's a fantastic point.
Put that on the YouTube thing and open the show. Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay. I think I'm gonna wrap it up, but the way I want to wrap this up is I want to know what you guys are doing next, and then I'll talk about what the upcoming panels are going to be, and again invite you back for those. So again, in alphabetical order, what are you up to? What's next for you?
Well, I'm actually working on a crime mystery animation that is set in a fictional northern community, not unlike the one I live in. So I will be drawing, that is something I'm working towards. And I'm actually just was part of a group, and it's called Landlines, and it's an telephone audio-based installation, for lack of words to, and it's basically a call-in gallery where you can access different artists, and it's a sort of like a punch button kind of like journey experience where you listen to the prompts and then you make selections so you can choose things. So that is something that's going to be part of something called Ice Follies, which is happening on Lake Lake Nipigon in North Bay, and it's a giant 2-week on the ice festival of just installation art out on the land, out on the ice. So interestingly enough, as a virtual experience, we are one of the installations, oddly enough. So we're trying to figure out what that looks like.
Trevor?
Yep. My one of my businesses that I run is mixed martial arts. So it's like a UFC style event. I've been doing that for over a decade, and we hold about 6 events a year in Vancouver. These athletes, it's kind of like the minor leagues of like the UFC. So these athletes, they fight in order to like get to the next level. This is what I enjoy doing, and I enjoy promoting this event. I've been doing it for over a decade, writing, directing, and producing it. And currently, I'm just I'm illustrating a children's book, and I'm just working on my next my first feature. So I'm in the writing room, just trying to wrap my head around everything.
There's things you don't want to share, about your top secret projects. I'm not.
Oh yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. I actually just wrapped on my first animation that I co-directed about Rick Barteau, who's my uncle in Wiat, which I did not know how huge of an artist he was until after I did this project. And so now it's in the film festival circuit. And then I'm wrapping on a dance video again about my uncle and his relationship with his wife that kind of launched his career. And it's an homage to her, because I feel like as women, we don't often get the recognition we need. And this was a way to recognize her. And then I've got a list. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm working on my first horror film that I'm producing for my partner. It's called Reunion. We're gearing up to shoot it next year. And then the last thing that I'm very excited about is I'm making, there's another project. It's a doc that I'm working about the tribe getting the land back. We are the first tribe to ever receive land back without any stipulations, which was really exciting. And then the last thing is I'm making Duke into a feature. It's going to be a comedy, not a drama, which is really weird, about the boarding school experience in the 80s, about a grandmother and her granddaughter going on a road trip and then finding out who her grandmother is.
Okay, sweet. Okay, Terry.
Yeah, hi. I'm it's going to be Native Heritage Month, November 1st. So then the pandemic, I usually do community screenings and presentations during that time. So I'm getting booked up pretty good in high schools. And I'm going to Syracuse University to do something on being an entrepreneur and a filmmaker, local library, local high school. Usually with all of these things, my moniker is Corn Soup Man. So I always bring traditional Iroquois corn soup. A lot of my films have corn in it, so it's just kind of a great way to wrap up the experience for everybody, because food and engaging the 5 senses somehow lets everybody like engage and have great discussions. My newest experimental film, Savage Future, is going to play at First Nations Film and Video Festival. It's also off to Denver and Los Angeles. I'm also doing the Haudenosaunee micro short film program at the Seneca Casino. That's in November as well. I'm shooting a short film for one of my courses at York University. I hope I can get it done in time. And if anybody wants to go to my website. It's tornjerseymedia.com. There I have a list of all my films and my projects and stuff like that. So
Sweet. If you have any like websites like that, just email them to me and I'll put them on the YouTube thing for links. Thanks, Terry. Victoria. Victoria?
Yeah, hi. I do have a lot of things going on. I have an interview that I did that I'm structuring the documentary, the story around, is a woman who has come forward to talk about her involuntary sterilization. And we know that there are a lot of women out there, women that are in their 60s now, are willing to talk about it, whereas they weren't willing to talk about it before, Native women, because of course family, children are so much a part of the culture and then how you're perceived. So that's a project that I'm working on how to tell that story and to talk about. As a lawyer, I see the legal angle and addressing the legal issues as well, and the horrendous federal policy that led to that the federal government is still not admitted that they actually had. So I'm hoping this will shed a little bit of light on that. And I also have a platform that I write on every week, and I'm just gonna put it in the chat here. And I put my short documentaries there for paid subscribers when I write about those topics. And I write about it, Native American topics, Indigenous topics, and law and technology.
Great. Well, thank you. It's really fantastic that everybody's so busy, and it makes me feel inadequate. But lastly, I want to really thank you. We have some upcoming panel discussions planned. The first one is entitled "The Conqueror's Remorse," and it's about the Native reaction to sort of like the exploitation of grief mourn, sort of thought. And then after that, we're trying to plan one on the Afro-Native and Indigenous experience. And that will round out this season. And then we have so many others planned. I want to revive the other 51% for Native women filmmakers, maybe even do one for Two-Spirited and LGBT filmmakers as well. I mean, these are all, I want these all to be sort of like a space that we can all discuss these sorts of things. And I hope you felt that way as well. Again, I want to thank you. You guys are all very inspiring. I love your work. We purposely programmed Victoria's archaeology film at the Field Museum. So I want to see what the reaction to that is. So if everybody wants to take a moment to say so long, I will close out the festival with some thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you all.
Ernest. It was lovely to meet everyone too.
Nice meeting you.
Yes, thanks. Film Festival starts November 1st with the screening of Rustic Oracle at the Music Box Theater. So if you can make it there, please attend. Seats are going fast, believe it or not. And then the rest of the film festival runs through the 9th at various locations around Chicagoland, but we do have 2 online programs on the weekends. So I want to thank you all again. And I want to thank the audience for attending. This will be posted in YouTube within about a week. And please feel free to share it when you see it. And I want to thank you all again from the bottom of my heart. And I wish you all a good night.